Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Lucinda Rouse.
And I'm Dami Adewale. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. This week we'll be finding out about participatory grant-making as a way of evening the playing field.
It's an approach to giving that has been championed by Camden Giving, among others. Camden Giving is a grant maker that is working to address local inequality and poverty in the London Borough of Camden. And our two guests this week are from the charity. First up is Natasha Friend, Director of Camden Giving. Hi, Natasha.
Hi.
And also with us is Morgan-Chu, the Chair of Camden Giving. And in his day job, he serves as Director of Partnerships and Policy at School for Social Entrepreneurs. Hi, Robin.
Hi, everyone.
We didn't do much preamble to this discussion because I think it's always good to ask the people in the know what it is exactly that we're talking about. So, Natasha, as a first question for you, what is participatory grant making?
There are as many different ways of doing participatory grant making as I've had hot dinners. It's not one thing, but as a general consensus, it is a way of ceding power of a foundation to the people that foundation aims to help. In some cases, that means there's a collective of people coming together to make decisions on how a grant pot is split. So that works really well with movement-based funding. In our case, we're ceding power to community members in Camden who are experiencing poverty and inequality and working with a community-based model. But there's lots of different ways of doing participatory grant making, and it means different things to different people. And then there are lots of things that are in between traditional foundation and in between participatory grant making, sort of taking bits from both approaches.
And lots of ways of even saying the word. I mean, you've got it down. I'm saying participatory because it's slower. It's probably incorrect, but yes, as a reflection. So at Camden Giving, how much of your giving has been through this participatory means?
All of it. And yeah, it's impossible to say. And it's a real flaw in the movement for participatory grant making that it's impossible for anyone to say. But we were set up in 2017 and we're an unendowed foundation. And we were set up because there is a huge amount of wealth in Camden. There's huge business wealth and there's also huge private wealth in Camden. But despite that, it has the highest rate of poverty in the country. There's a 13-year life expectancy gap for men between the poorest ward and the wealthiest ward in the borough. So there's a load of good stuff in Camden, but it's not being felt by everyone. So I was the first member of staff at Camden Giving. There was a steering group that was setting us up. On that first day, someone brilliant called Sue said in our first meeting with that steering group, and obviously we won't make decisions on grants. And everyone went, yeah, obviously. And we didn't talk about it anymore. I really think it was the quickest conversation because in a place like Camden, and like most of the UK, there are places and people and businesses that hold a lot of power sitting next to communities that don't hold a lot of power. And why would you duplicate that really damaging dynamic again when setting up something new? So I've never made a decision on a grant at Camden Giving. None of the staff team have, none of the board have. It's always been made by community members who are close to the challenges that Camden's facing. And that's not to say it's them and us. There are people in the staff team at Camden Giving and people in the board who are also close to those challenges, but they hold a certain level of power because they are employed by Camden Giving or on the board of Camden Giving.
Well, I'm really looking forward to finding out in just a minute about how you are making that work and what processes you have in place to ensure that you've got the right people making the decisions about where the money goes. But first, Robin, you've been chair of Camden Giving for, I think, just over 6 months now. What drew you to it?
Before my current role at School for Social Entrepreneurs, I used to run my own social enterprise called Coach Bright, a social mobility organisation helping disadvantaged young people get into universities, workplaces. And really, I was on the other side of this field, if you like. I was the one seeking funding and applying for opportunities. And what I found in my kind of 10-year gig at kind of founding and running Coach Bright was just how not transparent, challenging, and hard it was to fundamentally keep the show on the road. How do you fundamentally essentially raise cash to deliver really impactful, good work? And in my view, the way funding traditionally is given in the sector feels broken and it feels dated. So being able to join Camden Giving as chair, and Coach Bright was based in Camden for over a decade, you get to see firsthand the amazing impact of the work the work in terms of bringing communities together, like Natasha has said, and giving communities power. But two, I guess equally as important, is it speaks to a wider shift the funding landscape needs to make, which is how do we move away from boardrooms of quite private, not very transparent people taking decisions to actually allowing communities, often those with lived experience, often those who are ultimately going to be accessing the services that they've decided to fund. How do we give them more power and agency in this debate? And that's kind of what drew me to Camden Giving.
So you've given quite a good explanation of what participatory grant making is, but I was just thinking about the practical side. Could you just tell me how the model works in practice?
So we have a board of trustees and we're a CIO, and the board have devolved grant making decisions to panels, usually of around 12 people, and they are people with first-hand experience of what that money aims to address. So if we're working with young people on their safety, we'll work with young people who have experience of being unsafe or are very at risk of being unsafe. And they will design the fund, they will set the parameters for it, they will set questions for it, they will, if necessary, go and visit projects to make their decisions, and they will make a decision on the fund. The board do then sign off our grants, but they're not signing it off on, did you like that community project or did you like that community project? They're signing it off based on feedback from that group of young people on whether or not they've been well supported to make the decisions. Are we just chucking money at them and putting them in a room and saying, work it out amongst yourselves, and then signing that off? We want to make sure they've had everything they need, all the experience, all the data, all of the sort of understanding of what's going on in the wider funding sector to make that decision. The board have also devolved the sort of strategy for grant making to our alumni. So that's anyone who's ever awarded a grant with us. They're in a big voting group called our alumni, and they vote about 4 times a year on things to do with our grant strategy. So if we're setting up a youth safety fund, it will most likely have been them in the first place that says youth safety is a priority, set up a fund. And they'll set things like the size of grant we're giving, and we do a big vote out to them 4 times a year, and we usually get about 150 votes back in that group.
And then how do you get that group of 15 in the first place? How are they selected?
All sorts of different routes. We've got lots of partners that refer to us informally and formally. So Camden's Youth Offending Service are brilliant at referring to us. Some schools refer to us. Lots of our grantees will refer to us as well. We also have some funded partnerships with 4 different organisations that are filling a gap that's particularly important for us. So we work closely with an organisation called the Matt and Naz Foundation that's referring people of the LGBTQ community in Camden. We've got a partner that works with us with Camdenites for Disabilities, and a partner that works with us with supporting young people, and another that supports with the Bengali community, just because we know we wouldn't reach them without those funded partnerships. Increasingly, people are just sending people to us. So your cousin's been on it last year and it was a good experience, and people are coming to us more organically now, which is really, really brilliant. But it does present us with a bit of a challenge, a brilliant challenge that we're very keen to unlock, is that lots of people want to be involved in our grant making, and we think there should be lots of people involved in our grant making. So this year we're trialing 4 different models of how we can involve a really wide group of people in decision making about grants without losing some of the really beautiful benefits that we've seen coming from people being involved in it. People apply to us any which way they want to as well. So you can send a WhatsApp note, you can fill in a form on the website, or you can do the good old-fashioned CV and cover letter. Whoever's referring you can sort of support you to come to us as well. We invite everyone that applies to us to an informal interview with 1 member of the team and 1 member of the alumni, and they'll interview together. And we're not at all looking for people that have got experience of doing grant making, because there aren't very many of those people on planet Earth. We're looking for people that have something to say on issues that we're trying to address. So if they're not able to sort of have a view on how to make things change, then we really want to work with them, but that probably isn't the right opportunity for them at that moment.
You've briefly touched on the challenges of bringing people in organically there, but I wanted to come back to that in a second and just focus on the benefits of participatory grant making, if you could cover that.
The most important benefit is the community weaving and the consensus building across a community. It's not the grants. The grants are important and lots of people do really brilliant work with the money that we award to them. But the most important bit is the community bit. And I don't know, every time you open the news or a social media app, you're constantly being told that people can't agree on anything and we're a divided world and everyone hates each other. And on a weekly basis, I'll be with people of huge difference. Tonight, I'll be with a group that they are very, very different people who've experienced very different sorts of inequality for different reasons. They're of different ages, different nationalities, different ethnicities. They're very different as a group. They don't ever argue. And there's been the odd moment where there's been some disagreement or some biases that are not pleasant have been brought into a room, and actually we've been able to facilitate away from that place of mistrust between individuals and support people to understand each other's perspectives. And I think that is the most important thing, and supporting a democracy that isn't all about elections, of people being together making decisions. That feels like the biggest benefit. But there's also loads of other benefits in the grants as well. If you ask people that are living in Camden and using services in Camden, which Camden services are best to fund, you get much better answers than people sitting in boardrooms who are making decisions based purely on an application or based purely on data. The data that is in the heads of our grant makers is like millions and billions of touch points that is called their life. Like, they've got so much more information. And I've been doing this for 8 years now, and you'd think I'd have sort of learned the recipe for perfect grant making in Camden, and I would be able to always predict what our panels will fund. And actually it amazes me how that is constantly changing, and there's so much knowledge that I can't possibly learn people have because they've lived it. That means that my judgments aren't always right. So even having done it for 8 years, I don't think I could replicate what our participatory grant making does without the participatory bit.
And you can kind of hear in Natasha's tone that I think another benefit that's important to say is that it fundamentally is joyful work. And it's important to say that in a context of 2025, the country feels quite miserable, and it feels like we're quite divided, and it feels like trust is lower than it's ever been before, whether you're talking politicians or media or other kind of, institutions that we should kind of cede kind of civic leadership to. So there's something quite fascinating about actually true participatory work is actually quite fun. There's something just quite interesting about bringing diverse groups together who have skin in the game, who actually care about whether it's this local place or this particular issue, is a thing that unites people more than it divides them. And it's important to contrast that with, what traditional grant making looks like. I was preparing for this and I remembered when I was going for a Coach Bright grant, I won't name the funder because that'd be unfair. I went to pitch for this fund, and it was at Mayfair in central London. And I specifically remember this because I'd never been to Mayfair and I'd seen it on the Monopoly board. So I was like, oh, look, I'm in Mayfair. This is fun. And I remember going into their offices to this trustee board to pitch this idea of, social mobility, coaching in schools. And you could so see, for me, the stakes were high. This grant was kind of all or nothing for Coach Bright being able to survive for another year and to support the young people we wanted to support. But for the people I was pitching, this was just like a fun Tuesday afternoon activity that, very well intentioned, but fundamentally they were removed from the issue. And you could see that in the types of people they were, but also the types of questions they were asking. What's interesting about participatory grant making done well is that actually you have shared stakes, that if you're the one deciding and you choose badly or you choose well, like the local community are going to know about it. Like, actually, you've got skin in the game. And actually, we know all leadership decisions, all grant decisions, they're hard decisions. You only have a limited pot of money. So you can only choose kind of a few, can't choose everything. You can only choose a few things. But because they actually have skin in the game, they could be based in that area. it actually forces you to take the decision more seriously and consider it more rather than it just being a kind of hobby on a Tuesday night.
And is it possible to do participatory grant making effectively at the national level? Obviously, at Camden Giving, you are in a very specific geographical area. You've talked about the sense of community that is cultivated from working together on these problems. But is it possible to do nationally?
I mean, I think we're starting to see a shift towards bigger national funders who are interested in this work. The National Lottery Community Fund, they've released a new stream called a kind of You Decide Fund, which is exploring how this might work. There are others like Paul Hamlyn Foundation who have devolved their funding to the likes of participatory grant makers like Camden Giving and other kind of giving networks. And then you've got, and we're doing some work with them, the likes of Children in Need who are doing some participatory work on their youth work.
Yeah, there's definitely an increase in funders wanting to become more participatory and seeing the benefits of it. The way we've worked with Children in Need is that we're working with them in a London-based fund. So it is still quite place-based. It's not as small as Camden, but it's quite place-based. And we have done work with other national funders to support them with their participatory grant making and worked more nationally and been able to take people from different areas that were a priority, and we did it all on Zoom, and it was great. I work for a place-based foundation, so obviously I believe in place-based work, but know that not all foundations are able to work in that way, and nor should all foundations work in that way either. With scaling it across the country, what you either have to do is accept that you're going to do less of the deliberative work. So we do a lot of sitting and chatting on what do you think about this issue and what do you think about this issue, and consensus building and hearing from each other and sort of getting through difficult decisions by talking ultimately. You either lose some of that and put it out to more of a vote style participatory grant making system where there's less deliberation, but you've got lots of people that feel some level of power, or you just accept that you're going to work with a smaller number of people and do that deliberative work nationally, but you're not going to have the scale of the impact of the participation element. I think there's definitely potential for more place-based participatory work. There's loads of place-based funders or funders that are national but have areas of priority, and they could be supporting participatory grant making to be happening there, either by, as Paul Hamlyn do, devolving through other foundations, or as Children in Need are doing, like setting up their own in-house fund. I think what there is a lack of is people to facilitate that participatory grant making to happen. It's a real skill to sit in a room with strangers, and when something uncomfortable is said, help navigate around it. It's a real skill to make people feel they can be their true authentic selves in a space and not have to come and pretend to be grant makers, or not to replicate the gatekeeping they might have experienced in their lives. My colleagues at Camden Giving are brilliant at it, but I don't see enough people around the country that could hold those spaces necessarily. And I think people get quite hung up on the legalities of how you devolve funding into a community, but I think the skills needed to do it is lacking a little bit as well. So I think there's a real space for a funder or multiple funders or government to invest in the skills needed for participatory work to happen around the country.
It's actually like a whole new role in the sector that we need more and more people to fill.
Yeah, and people say to me sometimes, oh, everyone's worried about participatory grant making because they're worried it will do everyone at foundations out of jobs. And that is a definite real thing that I've seen in people's eyes. But it doesn't, there are people working at Camden Giving. We've still got jobs, but it's a different job. It's not a decision-making job. It's enabling other people to make decisions. And that is a skill set that a lot of people at foundations have. A lot of people have come from frontline work and forgotten how to do that, but could be reminded of how to work with people. I suppose my view, this maybe isn't a Camden Giving view, Robert. My view is if you work at a foundation that works on women's safety, say, but you've got people in your team at that foundation that can't interact with dignity with women that have experienced being unsafe, then I think they're in the wrong job. If your foundation is full of people that can't interact with the people your foundation is set up to serve, then get on out of the sector would probably be my quite bold opinion.
Just speaking about making the model work on a more national level, do you think there's a more effective model from the research that you've done or things that you've looked at? Do you think maybe an in-house model like Children in Need or a devolution model is more effective?
I think each foundation will have to kind of choose for themselves based on kind of what works. I mean, I I do agree with Natasha that especially if you're working on a place-based level, the best thing national funders can do is devolve money regionally or locally. And you can actually see that with central government at the moment, that increasingly central government are making the decision that Whitehall does not know best. Westminster and Whitehall don't know what's happening in the likes of Stoke-on-Trent or Birmingham or Greater Manchester or whatever. And that's why they're devolving increasing amounts of money and decision-making to combined authorities and local authorities. What's interesting about that is your national trusts and foundations are going to be caught living in a kind of dated past, really, because they're kind of still kind of holding power centrally. So I think more devolution, the better, to kind of community foundations, place-based foundations who actually know the area best, I would probably say is my view.
Even more than foundations being caught in the past, they've got potential at the moment to be the future and to lay some of the groundwork for government devolving into local places, because government can't just devolve. There needs to be these mechanisms and skills for place-based decision-making, be that for government money or political systems, or be that for foundations. So foundations have the potential to sort of lay the pathway for doing that. I think foundations are so varied and their missions are so varied, there isn't sort of a best way of doing it. I would suggest that cancer research shouldn't be devolving to place-based, or perhaps shouldn't be participatory at all. But there are some foundations where working in place really makes sense. In Camden, that feels to really make sense when you're doing work to support racial justice because of the sort of geographical makeup of where the Somali and Bengali and other ethnic communities have sort of landed in Camden. That makes sense. But then to do LGBT work, place-based, actually, we found a lot more challenging. And I think in that case, there's a justification for being a lot larger than a small community and sort of looking at the infrastructure across a whole country of how that's supporting LGBT communities.
I'd like to move on to internal setup now, and I start with the board. So, Robin, how does the function of the board differ, if at all, between participatory grant makers and other forms of grant maker?
Well, I think the big one, I guess the fundamental difference is we wouldn't sit around board meetings debating, are we funding this project or are we funding that project? Because that function, if you like, has been devolved to grant panels on the ground. What that does mean, though, is we still have loads of other functions that are really, really important. And I think sometimes trustees get confused here, which is they think, oh, like you're going to go towards a more participatory approach. That means you're just sitting around not doing much. And that's just definitely not true. Natasha makes sure that's not true. So I think there's much kind of wider roles that a trustee board has to play, which is, stuff that everyone would be familiar with around kind of, how would you hold the team to account? Camden Giving, like many kind of place-based foundations, we have to kind of fundraise to then, we're a re-grantor by trade, if you like. We have to get money in to then distribute it out. So we need to find partners to work with. How can the board open up their networks and their expertise to help do that? How do we ensure that the kind of policies and systems that we're making for the organisation actually adhere to the kind of principles that we've set in Camden Giving's mission? Some of the kind of most joyful and most important work that we do is we have a racial justice subcommittee group, and they are kind of subset of the board and the team, and they look at kind of policies or approaches from a kind of racial justice lens. So even though we've kind of delegated or devolved decision-making on grants, it doesn't mean the board isn't busy. They're still out there kind of making sure that we're fundraising right, we're getting the right policies, we're meeting our kind of safeguarding commitments, we're meeting our kind of finance commitments. So lots still to do, I think, for a board, even with the change in funding approach.
In terms of other internal adjustments, if there was a grant maker, even if it was a place-based grant maker, what changes would it have to make in order to become more participatory in terms of how the team's set up, for example? You
need to start thinking of yourself a bit more like a frontline organisation. In fact, quite a lot more like a frontline organisation. So you need safeguarding practices in place and you need people that feel confident with that safeguarding, because you're suddenly working directly with people. So that needs to be in place. we feel at Camden Giving quite strongly that people should be paid for being involved in participatory grant making. It's important in lots of ways, but I think the most important way is the symbolic nature that we're not sitting in a room where the staff are being paid, but communities are being extracted from. But just practically, I think it means we're able to get lots of young people that are involved in our grant making. For an awful lot of people, we've been the first job. So there's lots of reasons that paying people is important, but that does mean you need some budget in place in order to pay people. We pay people at London living wage plus 20%. And actually, in the grand scheme of a running of a foundation, it is not a huge expense to pay people because people are living full-time lives outside of grant making with us. They're not actually with us doing the work for that much time. You need quite a big pizza budget. It's really important to feed people whilst they're doing participatory grant making. And I think just being able to offer people more than just money has become increasingly important to us. So people come, and I don't think people come to us for grant making just to get paid. It's not a very efficient way lucrative of paying your rent. No, but I think they give us so much more than we pay them for, and therefore being able to support them with other things that they might need in their lives. And that has very often been support to get jobs. We've helped people with their right to remain applications. We've supported people in all sorts of different ways, and just being able to give them more, even if that's friendship. Like there's a woman who had to go into hospital while she was grant making with us, and some of the other people on the panel were going around taking pictures of flowers and sending them to her in the hospital. It's obviously like not a Camden Giving program that we set up on purpose, but like I hope what we've given her is friendship, and just being able to give people more than just money, I think, is an important thing for a foundation to have in place. You'd want some conflict of interest policy in place if you were setting up participatory grant making for the first time, but I would say a lot of these things are less stressful than people worry they're going to be. The very nature of participatory grant making is you invite people in to do grant making because they have a conflict of interest. Like if they didn't have a conflict of interest, we wouldn't be working with them. Their interest is what ours is making Camden a better place for everyone. So we try not to get people to park their conflicts too much at the door, because then they stop bringing us their brilliant insights as well. But in lots of ways, we run just like any old other foundation. We've got a Salesforce system that all our grants sit on, and a website that people apply for, and you can come and chat to us about your grants. You can give us a ring. Like we're in so many ways like a traditional foundation. It's nowhere near as radical as people make it out to be.
But are there any downsides to this form of giving, or anything that you find particularly difficult?
I mean, one is it takes time and resource. And I think that's important to say up front, that the shift is you're going from a decision maker to an enabler. And that is a shift that I think we at Camden Giving kind of intuitively get as an organisation because of our history. And we've always been a participatory grant maker since day one, really. But I think the challenge for the sector is you've got board members and CEOs and senior leaders who, the uncomfortable truth in the social sector is you've got people who sometimes see themselves as a bit of a martyr, right? As a bit of a, they are the ones to pull off the great thing. I'm the one to pull off that's the project that we need to back, sort of thing. And the shift towards this far more democratic participatory approach is that's not the job anymore. The job is actually, how do you convene people? How do you facilitate really interesting discussions? How do you give people the relevant context and data so that they can make an informed choice on whatever the thing is? And that's a massive cultural shift. And I think what's fascinating about that is at Camden Giving, we've done well there because we've got staff members who are really from the front line. When you say, Natasha, you've got kind of people that have worked in youth work, they've worked in other kind of frontline charities. So to move the sector in this direction does require, one, a cultural shift, but probably a slight kind of talent shift and, who's working in these types of organizations. That is going to take time and needs to be resourced well. I think I wouldn't want us to leave here to say, everyone should be a participatory grant maker overnight, because actually it's really not that simple. Like actually you need to train people in the skill of actually how to convene, how to facilitate. You need to get the right people that have lived experience to be able to do that well. So that there is a kind of time and resource and staging thing.
Just looking beyond funders now, is there anything else that the wider sector can learn about Camden Giving's experience with participatory grant making?
I optimistically think lots of foundations are moving towards participatory grant making. And I think one of the real challenges of that is that the social good sector and grant receivers have learnt to perform for foundations. And the foundations will say, we're investing in the health of a really good social sector. Our grant makers couldn't care less about the health of the social good sector. So no, that's not quite true. They do care a bit, but they don't wake up in the morning and go, I hope that the charity sector's run really healthily. They wake up in the morning and they go, I hope that my neighbour has got enough food, and I hope that my kids feel safe on the way home. Like, that's what they wake up caring about. The social good sector is a way of getting there, but it's not the reason they come and grant mate with us. And I think that power dynamic that we've all sort of learnt to politely play around, where people are I bet people would be very nice to Robin if we were, I hope people are very nice to you anyway, but if we were a good old fashioned non-participatory funder, people would be exceptionally nice and come and sort of see us as take Natasha and Robin for a drink and form a friendship with them. That's a really good way of getting a grant. And actually that's completely useless in our model. Not that people shouldn't be nice to Robin just for the joy of being nice to him, but all the things we've learned about fundraising it needs to be unlearned a little bit if we become more participatory. And I think that means that it's a good thing for organisations doing frontline work, but they do need to shake off a little bit of the performing for funders and be able to really evidence that what they're doing is good for the people that they're working with, not good for what funders want to hear. I think on the whole, organisations are really good at having beneficiary voice coming into their work. I think the delivery part of the third sector has already taken massive steps towards making sure there is representation of beneficiaries at board level and having advisory groups and ensuring people are feeding in, partly because funders, ironically, have been asking them to do it whilst not doing it themselves. So I think actually there's a lot more funders could learn from their grantees about how they're involving beneficiary voice, for want of a better term, in their work.
And as a final question to you both, if there was one thing that your traditional funder should be doing differently, what would it be?
I guess for me, it's a cultural shift. It's that point around kind of dropping the ego and thinking about actually who really cares about this theme area or this place that we're funding, and how can we involve them in doing something. But I think there's a fundamental bit there as to going, actually, as a foundation leader or as a board, we're probably not the experts, and actually people on the ground, they are the ones that care about this, and they are the ones that are going to be most affected by this. So how do we move in that direction? But that takes kind of shaking off ego and letting go.
I think just sort of really asking yourself what potential you have as a funder to foster democracy and healthy society amongst the people that you're aiming to support, not just helping people survive inequality, but what are you doing to build the foundations that needed for a community to move away from that inequality.
Okay, so drop the ego, promote and foster democracy, and don't think that asking either of you out for a drink is going to get you any form of funding.
Spot on. Yeah.
I'm not endorsing that.
Yeah. Robin, Natasha, it's been so great to have you on. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Natasha and Robin, and that's it for this episode. Next week, we'll be hearing from another grant maker, this time Nicole Sykes, the Director of Policy, Communications and Research at the Lloyds Bank Foundation. But for now, from all of us at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. Our producer is Nav Pal.